Arks of Omen, Angron. The Eaters of Worlds, the blood god's sacred slaughtermen, chosen legion of Khorne. None there are who offer greater tribute to the Lord of Skulls, none more committed to battle in his name. Many are those who brand the World Eaters shattered, fragmented sons of a broken father. Those same fools soon fall beneath the churning teeth of blooded blades, their skulls cast flensing upon the offering pile. Yet for all their sacred butchery, there are none amongst this blood-blessed brotherhood to compare to their sire. He is the bladed hurricane, he is the unstoppable beast, fury given form, the gore-spattered demigod of carnage. He is the Red Angel, and demons and mortals have slain and striven for the honor of fighting in his charnel shadow. He is Angron, the Eater of Worlds, and his onset heralds death. Vid feed commence. The image flickers to life. The thrum of grav impellers and the bobbing of the camera suggests a servo skull or similar recording device. Image quality is grainy, stifled with static. It shows an interior space, the suggestion of a cavernously high ceiling and the stacks of boxy shapes under tarpaulins hinting at a warehouse. The light is restricted to grey shafts that fall through unseen apertures above. Oddly garbed figures move through the pools of light. Several wear matte black body armor and have weapons slung on straps. Another is clad in a capacious robe and has quills for fingers. A powerfully built woman crosses the image, her garb a cross between a jester's motley and the dark body glove of an assassin. Two things unify the figures. The first is the stylized eye they all bear somewhere about their persons, patched onto their clothing or hanging in pendant form from their necks. The other is that they carry armfuls of broken wood to add to the pyre growing in the middle of the warehouse floor. Now the audio pickup detects voices, approaching swiftly, and accompanied by sounds of something heavy scuffing the stone floor. Do not have time for these theatrics, Siegfried. You are not listening. The Red Angel is coming. He cannot be banished. Not with the galaxy torn in twain as it is. Not with the tides of the Sea of Souls spilling free across the God Emperor's realm. There is the sound of an open-handed slap. One of the passing acolytes winces at something out of shot, then hastens to deposit his next bundle of kindling. Another voice speaks now, still coming nearer. The scuffing has resumed. Keep the God Emperor's name out of your filthy radical mouth, Prentice. You are unworthy to utter it. The speakers enter shot. One is heavyset and glowering, with a witch hunter's hat perched atop his greasy black hair, and a long coat billowing around him. The other, being hauled along by his bound wrists, is a smaller man with a shaved scalp and a tattered crimson robe. He has a split lip and a swelling bruise under his eye. He catches sight of the pyre and the stake rising from it. He redoubles his struggles, and his voice rises. Siegfried, you cannot! You do not know the sacrifices I have made, the lives it has cost to know what I know! The witch hunter appears unmoved. With the aid of the big woman and one of the soldiers, he hoists Prentice aloft and lashes him to the stake. A design is now visible on the smaller man's chest. A stylized eye, forming the center of a skull-like rune. The camera cannot focus upon it without the image warping. Prentice speaks fast and breathlessly. 8 days, 8 hours, 8 minutes! This is how long we have between his banishment and his return. Always! Every time. He returns ever to a site where terrible bloodshed has transpired, and he is preceded by his crimson omens. They are a warning from the god Emperor. Let me guess, Siegfried interjects, beckoning to one of his soldiers. A military-grade flamer is handed across. There's 8 of them. Yes, exclaims Prentice. The blood rain, the flesh-brand plague, the storms of hate. And what use is any of this alleged knowledge, tainted as it is by heresy? Asks Siegfried. He ignites the flamer's pilot light. Its hiss sounds serpentine through the vid feed. It means I know where he came back this time, yells Prentice, with the desperation of a man whose life's work is immolating before his eyes. It means I know where he is going, and we have to warn them. The Choral Engine must be silenced. It will draw anger. The roar of the flamer drowns out Prentice's last words. After that comes a hungry crackle of burning wood and a man's shrill screams. Contact Lady Imagna, Siegfried tells someone out of shot as he watches the figure on the stake writhe and burn. Tell her the lies of the radical have been silenced. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Baldermort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the forces, factions, and events of the Warhammer 40k universe. The grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace. There is only time for war. And today, we continue on with the newest campaign, the Arks of Omen, as it is meant to be building to an event that will shatter and transform the entire setting, as did the Gathering Storm before it. Hence today, we shall be covering the second book, titled simply Angron. If you know nothing of these things, then please see my entry for the Arks of Omen, Abaddon, links in the description. But I shall give a tiny catch-up for simplicity's sake. Abaddon, the War Master of Chaos, has been approached by a demon of staggering power, a figure hitherto unknown by many below the exalted rank of the 4 gods of chaos. Vashtor the Archifane is a being who owes fealty to none of the gods. In fact, he plays a deadly game to become one of them himself. He wishes to be elevated to a true god of chaos and take a seat in the great game. And to this end, he has forged what he has touted as a mutually beneficial alliance with the War Master. He has created great Arks of Omen and ostensibly gifted them to Abaddon. The Arks are vast space hulks, composites of scores of ancient wrecks merged in the warp. The Archifane is a lord of technology, you see. And his power is to create fell beings of twisted metal, or to repair and augment that which he is presented with. Hence the space hulks are brought online and brought under the will of the Archifane, gifted to Abaddon, who then divvies them up to his most trusted captains. With the power of these massive behemoths, they fly to set locations and attempt to capture items they have been tasked by the War Master to gain. For Abaddon and Vashtor believe that they can take these rare artifacts and fulfill a prophetic dream Abaddon has had, and in so doing, combine them to unlock a weapon of such vast power that with it, Abaddon can bring the entire Imperium to its knees. And of course, Vashtor plans to be elevated to a god. Hence the two work in concert to send out these horrors into the galaxy. Once completed, the tasked artifact gained, all of the Ark commanders can then do as they please. Hence, Abaddon knows that they will take these vast weapons and bring carnage and chaos to near every sector of the galaxy. But one fundamental element, one particularly important artifact, lays in the Malak system. And this is the home of the 4th Indomitus Crusade Fleet, Fleet Quartus. and even an Ark of Omen and its surrounding and supporting fleet would be torn apart in any assault. At least, this is what Abaddon told the Archifane Vashtor. But neither were truly concerned, as Abaddon revealed that none other than the Red Angel, the right hand of Khorne, would be leading forces to that locale. And thus, the scene is set. An Imperial fleet and heavily defended system stands in the way of an unstoppable force. The rage and fury of a demigod, the power of a Primarch turned to evil, the Lord of the World Eaters, Angron. But what has drawn the Red Angel from the battlefields of the far more important war? The Great Game. For a lieutenant of Khorne of such might, the war and the warp is far more important than anything that could usually transpire in real space. Yet, here Angron is, at the head of a fleet of World Eaters so colossal in both scope and size that its like has not been seen since the days of the heresy and scouring. Kharn is amongst them too. A veritable murder of crows descends on Malak Baal. But why? That can be answered with but 3 words. The Choral Engine. The Choral Engine. In the Malak system, there are multiple planets of import, but the one of utmost concern in this tale is Malak Baal. For that is where it was uncovered, and then quickly claimed by the Ordo Hereticus, investigated by the Inquisitor Glory Imagna. She first coined its new name, the Choral Engine. An ancient archaeotech installation and device of immense power, presumed to be an artifact of the Dark Age of technology, when humankind bestrode the stars as an enlightened race of scientists, explorers, colonizers, and traders, some 15,000 years or more ago. Before the Age of Strife, then the Age of the Imperium. The technological marvels that humanity once commanded were of paramount importance to the Imperium, Adeptus Mechanicum, and mankind entire. And Inquisitor Imagna claimed that this one relic of the past was the solution to so many problems. She went to Admiral Trinicus Abcondis of the Fleet Quartus and offered it as a resource. One he simply could not ignore. Quartus was an Indomitus fleet assigned to a fundamentally important role, just not a particularly glorious-sounding one. For they were to reinforce and clear regions previously smashed by other thrusts of the Crusade, yet the fighting was heavy, slow, and costly. And Quartus had fallen behind its exacting schedule of expected reclamation of worlds and systems, set by the Lord Commander Rabute Gilliman. There could be no recourse, no negotiation, and certainly no excuses. They needed to up their pace and success. Thus, when the Inquisitor came to Abcondis and explained the device, how it could affect things, what it could offer, there was no realistic way he could refuse. For Imagna explained that the Choral Engine was akin to an Astronomicon in miniature, and with it he could move his fleets more ably. He could reinforce and redeploy with near certainty, and that one fact would revolutionize his strategic situation. Above and beyond this, the engine would create a light that was inimical to the Neverborn, just like the Astronomicon. Thus it would hamper the demons, burning them, whilst becoming the warp itself for light years around it. And Abcondis never asked the cost. He just agreed almost instantly. Assurances were given that this was no heretical device, and from an Inquisitor of the Ordo Hereticus to boot. And from there, Fleet Quartus began to make up lost time. Centering his command and dispositions around the Malak system, they moved like lightning, bringing the Emperor's justice and his peace, if not his mercy, to all in their path, all coordinated from Malak Baal. For the Indomitus fleets were massive. Some think that they were equal to a standard crusade, like the ones performed in the age of the Imperium, where swathes of stars would be reclaimed, or even regional responses, crusades to smash a particular foe, as the Tau found out. Yet, these efforts, no matter how expansive before, paled into obscurity in comparison to the fleets of the Indomitus Crusade. A Primarch had raised them, organized them, drawing from every single system or sector that could spare them. Ships, troops, materials of war. Negotiated, nagged, commanded and controlled the resupply, refit and production of entire flotillas and attack groups before he even considered going off. With the new Primaris Marines, the Custodes, and Sisters of Silence and others, the Indomitus Crusade plows ever onwards. It has not concluded either. Not yet. Thus, the naval and military assets collected at the Malak system were akin to the expeditionary fleets of the Great Crusade. The forces arrayed as not seen in 10,000 years. But what exactly was the Choral Engine? To quote, the Choral Engine. Lady Magna had in her thrall a staff of archivists, cryptohistorators, and mechanicus magi, whose specialisms and theories placed them on the very cusp of tech heresy. It had taken this cabal decades to unearth and begin to comprehend the ancient Choral Engine, ascribing names and functions to its component parts based on their own preconceptions and prejudices. The Resonatum. This echoing tunnel formed an outer ring around the Choral Engine's central sanctum, with a diameter of precisely 401 feet. The Magi described it as reminiscent of a colossal electromagnet or sacred particle collider. The smooth and empty tunnel was ringed every 101 feet with a dense collar of bristling technologies, with stepped metal bridges leading over them. When the Choral Engine was in operation, crackling shockwaves of psychic energy thundered around and around the Resonatum, and served somehow to amplify the signal from the engine. Tunnels and bridges below and above the Resonatum connected the sanctum to the rest of the engine's outer complex, for to stand within it while the engine was in operation was a death sentence. The Sanctum. The central chamber of the Choral Engine was a vast space known as the Sanctum. The inner surfaces of this cavernous dome were thick with nests of cable, intricate circuitry, miles of dense wiring, and panels bearing constellations of winking lights and lenses. A ring of towering cogitators formed 100 feet high toroid at the heart of the chamber, with banks of operating thrones cradled in rows of ascending gantries all around them. It was from here that the operation of the Choral Engine and the monitoring of its layered moderator fail-safe protocols was controlled by a staff of magi and painstakingly integrated servitors. The Siphon Coil. Colossal in scale and enigmatic in its archaeotechnological workings, the Siphon Coil extended from the base of the Choral Engine and speared down through Malak Baal's crust to pierce its very core. It drew immense reserves of geothermic power from the depths, as well as appearing to harvest a wealth of subsidiary ores and minerals to facilitate the engine's widespread and quite ineffable self-repair systems. The Choristry Pits. In the subsidiary catacombs below the sanctum's mezzanine floor, open-fronted techno-sarcophagi known as Choristry Pits ringed the central chamber in staggered rows. A psyker installed into one of these choristry pits could expect to live for anything between 3 to 10 days, depending on their mental and physical fortitude. During that time, they poured their psychic energies and life force both into the Choral Engine to provide it with power. Once their service was done, their burned and withered husk would be removed and the choristry pit sanitized before the next occupant was installed. The Focusing Vein. A network of gantries crisscrossed the apex of the sanctum's domed ceiling. Through their center descended the vast circular stalactite of archaeotech, that formed the true heart of the Choral Engine. Stretching down to within 200 feet of the cogitator toroid and pointing right at its center, the so-called focusing vein contained a quartet of chambers into which were wired exceptionally talented astropaths. It was through their power and disciplined minds that the full energies of the Choral Engine flowed up and out into the depths of the warp. At least, until the engine's energies burned them from the inside out, and they writhed and screamed their way into an early grave. End quote. Hence, the device was heavily guarded, with a structure known as the Fortress of Light. And that ancient device was very like to the Astronomicon in another way. It was also hungry. And like the Golden Throne and devices on Earth, it was fed on the souls of psychers. Imagno was an inquisitor of rare skill, but twisted vision. The psychic awakening had wrought huge changes in the very structure of the Imperium, but also in the very makeup of its population. So many more humans were now born with the gift, a connection to the warp. They were birthed as psychers. Yet to Imagno, they were not human at all. Less than an abhuman. Psychers were not men or women who could be a threat. They were not even of the same species. To Imagno, psychers were less than cattle. They were batteries, power sources, flesh and blood machines sent by the Emperor to be used, to be expended. When Imagno discovered that the Choral Engine was a Sinistrum-class weapon, she did not flinch or hesitate in plugging in human psychers that the device would consume to power itself. The use of such weapons or devices was strictly outlawed. Sinistrum-class archaeotech was made specifically to augment and weaponize psychic energies, and it was the purview of the Ordo Sinister alone. Yet, that organization is so secretive, no normal inquisitor would even know of its existence. Hence Imagno arranged for hundreds of psychers to be brought to the location to feed the Choral Engine, each burning out and their souls being consumed by the device in the most horrific and painful of ways. Yet Imagno was never gainsaid. Like throwing witches into a massive pyre, so the slaughter continued, because the light of that Choral Engine was so very, very useful. Yet it attracted a reaction that none could predict. The coming of the Red Angel, the arrival of Angron himself. The chamber was a ruin. The devastation visited upon every inch of it was so absolute that even the vessel's master would have been hard-pressed to identify whether it had been a gun deck or a shrine, a crew berth or a launch bay. Walls, ceiling and floors were all scorched black, stripped with long and ragged gouges. There was no air in the chamber. A stretch of one wall had been laid open to space, a gaping wound punched outward through the hide of the conqueror. Whatever fittings or contents the chamber had held had all been sucked into the hungry void through that hole. Any mortal being still trapped there after the emergency shutter slammed down would have been slain by explosive decompression or the suffocating cold of space. Not that any mortal would have endured the whirlwind of violence that gutted the chamber to begin with. The thing who stood at the heart of the ruined chamber was no mortal, however, and did not suffer their weaknesses. He did not even notice the inimical environment surrounding him. Angron surveyed the space he had destroyed, and neither knew nor cared what it had been, or why he had done this. There had been the anger, white-hot, pounding in time to the hammer blows beating within his mind. There had been an explosive outpouring of violence, akin to the emergency venting of a Titan's overheated reactor. Now there was a return to the smouldering wrath that never left him. The furnace had scorched him from within for centuries beyond memory, and there was the pounding, pounding, pounding of the butcher's nails. Angron dimly recalled a being like him, but lesser. a brother long lost to time and to war. He recalled that being's assurances that any pain, even the nails, could be endured by demigods such as they, that a pain borne for long enough would dull and cool like iron drawn from the forge, that it could be beaten with the hammer of the will until it was folded into one's own self as new strength. Contempt boiled through Angron like lava overflowing a seething caldera. His lost brother's words had been no kindness, but rather an ignorant insult. Angron imagined them as the reassurances of a pampered lord to his starving hound that his hunger would only make it a keener hunter. Angron knew better. Some wounds bled and never healed. There were shades of agony in existence that never dulled, but instead grew sharper and more savage over time. The occasional troughs in his endless pain existed only to emphasize the next, still more towering peaks of agony that followed them. The pain didn't make him strong, but nor did it make him weak. It just was. The thing that made Angron strong was simply Angron. He prowled across the ruined chamber to the edge of the rent he had smashed in the hull. A moment of true lucidity offered context. He was high up in one of the strange Gothic spires that had sprouted from the Conqueror's hull, like malformed spurs of bone. Honeycombing the structure seemingly at random, the chambers and corridors in these towers lacked the solid bulwarks and thick outer walls boasted by the Conqueror's main bulk. It was, Angron considered, an inexcusable weakness, spawned of sorcerous corruption. He had split the vessel's skin from within with contemptuous ease. A memory tried to surface from amidst the scorching desolation of his thoughts. A time when the Conqueror had not suffered such weaknesses. Angron dug his talons into the metal decking in frustration, his lips skinned back from a mouthful of fangs. He glared out through the rent, at the stars scattering the velvet darkness beyond. The pulse of their distant lights came in time with the pounding, pounding, pounding in his mind. He hated their purity. He hated them because they could not feel pain. He hated them because one day, though they might live for the span of millions of transient human lives and burn near as furiously as he, in the end, it would be within their gift to die. Angron recalled other stars spread out across battlefields and burning worlds, or scattered as backdrops behind blazing warships that flung destruction at one another across the uncaring void. They brought to mind spectators who stared down from high seats, aloof from the pain and hatred of those who fought for their entertainment. "Arrogant," he snarled. Angron's voice was jagged boulders grinding one another to molten rubble in the heart of a raging volcano. It was the rumble of tank tracks grinding over bone, the crackle of flames amidst wreckage. It sounded through the vacuum in defiance of reality's meager physical laws. Angron hated the stars with the same passion that he hated every other thing in existence that had ever caught his notice. Yet their distant flames paled when compared to the supernatural brightness of the light that waited for him somewhere ahead. That he hated with far greater vehemence. The stars, after all, burned with fires born of reality. The light ahead was something altogether different, altogether more agonizing to behold, spawned as it was from the song of treacherous sorcery. Though the chamber in which he stood was wide and high-ceilinged, suddenly Angron felt confined by it, like an animal trapped in a cage. He threw himself forward into the void. He would face the light unconstrained and wrathful. Angron spread his wings and soared into the darkness, just as the restrictions of sound in a vacuum had no hold upon the concentrated warp stuff of his corporeal form. Neither did considerations of inertia or weightlessness. He did not fly by some mundane process of displaced air or applied force. He flew because he willed it so. And his was a will fit to dominate reality. Angron fought existence as though it were any other foe, and like any other foe, he broke it with ease. Now he flew up and out, wings beating, gaining height until the Conqueror's hull was passing beneath him like the body of some deep-sea leviathan. Distant starlight whitewashed the warship's starboard flank, while throwing the port into stark shadow. Angron glowered at the sight of the warp corruption that had dug its tendril so deeply into his flagship of old. A more sentimental being might have felt sorrow or regret at the sight. Angron felt nothing but the endless rage and pain. The Conqueror was no more or less tainted by chaos than he, and it would fight for Khorne just as he would. Like him, it would reap a mighty tally in the Blood God's name. The warship's mountainous bridge structure sat near its keel, and it swept toward him now. Angron beat his wings again, twisting in the void, and landed to perch like some huge crimson gargoyle atop a crenellated spire. He glowered ahead towards a light that grew brighter and closer with every passing moment. It was not a light of the eye, but rather of the mind. Angron could sense that its source was still distant, at least one more headlong plunge through the battering tides of the warp. Yet even from here, he felt its incorporeal heat simmering against his flesh, heard its faint but soaring psychic aria, and tasted the greasy taint of sorcery upon his forked tongue. Angron hated witchery with an intensity only exceeded by that of the dark god whose power flowed through him. He would have gladly followed this trail to its end, whether the so-called War Master had commanded to or not. Nothing ever dispelled Angron's agonies, but the wanton slaughter of witches certainly made them more worth suffering, at least for the few moments it took to swat aside their cantrips and rip them limb from limb. Yet there was something more that drew him towards this particular beacon of witchery. Its pull was as magnetic as it was maddening. It was also achingly familiar in a way that Angron could not quite define. That inability only fed the flames of his anger, and his talons tightened into a crushing grip that buckled metal while the nails pounded in his mind. More memories swam unbidden through the infernal heat haze of his mind's eye. He saw again his rebellion, his comrades in Deshaya dying one by one, and he wished only to join them, but instead being snatched away by a numinous being who he hated above all others. He stood before the walls of that being's palace, and he defied the wards and the guns, and he gave his flesh and blood in sacrifice to Khorne. He rose in raiment of rotting gore and searing brass, and he fought again in the Blood God's name. Why had the psychic beacon dredged thoughts of his father from the bloody mire of his memory? Angron did not want to think about the Emperor, and he knew that the light ahead was not that of the Astronomicon. But that infuriating familiarity persisted. A splinter lodged in the pummeled meat of his mind. Angron threw back his head and roared, and the sound rolled through the void like a thunderclap. He would learn the nature of that hateful glare soon enough, and when he did, he would do whatever violence must be done to extinguish it. Nor would Angron fight alone, though he cared little about such things. Turning his back upon the witchlight, he surveyed his fleet. Spread out behind the Conqueror in a ragged wedge was a veritable armada of renegade warships. Former battleships and cruisers of the Imperial Navy jostled for position with muscular Space Marine voidcraft, the freakish vessels of the Dark Mechanicum, and even some craft either belonging to or taken forcibly from Xenos mercenaries. At the heart of their formation sailed an immense space hulk, above whose dorsal mass flickered a captive warp portal. Angron was dimly aware that this vessel was the Clarion Dire, commanded by Lord Karaka Bloodfist, and sent to recover some prize from Malak Bale for the despoiler. If Abaddon expected Angron to defend that lumpen moon of a craft, or make any effort to facilitate its mission, he would be disappointed. The very presumption of such notions made Angron grind his fangs together with fury. Nearly all of the assembled warships displayed some degree of empiric corruption, be it blood-slicked metal extrusions, masses of barbed brass chains like octopodal tentacles, colossal hound's head prows whose yawning jaws belched flames, or any of a myriad other deformities. Angron could also see dozens of different colour schemes and heraldic designs upon the vessel's hulls. Some were displayed with martial pride, others looked hastily daubed, and were marred by blast scorches and impaled corpses. Dozens of renegade warbands, traitor chapters, fallen mortal regiments, and turncoat titan legions were present here. Yet outnumbering them all were the warships of Angron's own world-eaters. Again and again the emblem was repeated, a doomed planet trapped within fanged and crushing jaws. It appeared on ancient battle barges, whose hulls were all streaked gore and rusted brass. It stood out proud on the prows and flanks of cruisers and escorts clad in hues of crimson and bone, and even upon a few vessels still bearing the ghost of their legions white and blue. Angron did not know and did not care how so many of the world-eaters came to be here. He was in little doubt that this was the greatest gathering of their strength to be seen since the final days of Horus's vainglorious war. Some mechanism or machination had brought them all together to follow him in the attack upon the witch beacon. But if it was something of his own doing, Angron did not remember. Perhaps this was the despoiler's meddling. The thought stoked Angron's anger afresh. He had no need of this vast army that followed at his heels, did not require reinforcement or appreciate the implication of weakness it represented. Yet, at the same time, he knew the unimaginable devastation it could unleash. Angron imagined the cataclysmic bloodshed to come, the mountain range of skulls that would be raised in tribute to Khorne. The thought made the nails hammer hot in his mind, pounding, 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 driving him from his perch. With another roar, Angron leapt into the void and beat his wings furiously, as if through suitably violent action he might drive away the pain. As he flew, Angron saw yet more cornate void ships tearing their way from the warp into reality. Their battered hulls trailed streams of ectoplasm that tattered apart and streaked the void with warp filth. They reminded Angron of entrails ripped from a foe's gut and spilled streaming across the ground. The latecomers hoped to muscle into the formation, each trying to find a spot as close to the glorious conqueror as possible. Angron saw gun decks unshrouded and turrets swivel as the craft sought to bully their way in, the fangs of canids bared in threat to lesser members of the pack. One huge Oberon-class battleship, adorned in full World-Eater's panoply, scattered a swarm of frigates as it took up position brazenly close behind the Conqueror. Angron wondered for a fleeting moment whether Khan was aboard the craft. The sheer aggression of the maneuver smacked of his brute directness, and Angron did not doubt that his one-time equerry was somewhere amidst the gathering of might. How big would the fleet grow, he wondered. How long could so many devotees of the Lord of Battle wait before their patience frayed, before they turned guns and blades upon one another and made crimson offering to Khorne? Ultimately, neither question mattered, because neither he nor the Conqueror would be waiting any longer to find out. The ship had only dropped out of warp in order to take astromantic bearings for its final warp jump into the Malak system. Whether those readings had been completed or not, Angron would order immediate translation. He had no fear of misadventure in the Sea of Souls, and he cared nothing for the fate of those who followed him. Let the strong keep up if they could. They at least might prove capable of taking some loyalist heads upon Malak Bale. As Angron drove back down towards one of the Conqueror's embarkation decks, He felt again the invasive glare of the sorceress beacon, and his rage burned white-hot at its touch. The butcher's nails pounded in his mind, and he vowed to himself that he would drown that witchlight in blood until it could never be lit again. The Cursed Angel, the boy who never lived. Ah, was there ever a more cursed man than the fallen angel, the Red Angel, the demon Primarch, Angron? For many will look to the power of his exalted rank, his abilities and immortality, but few will really allow themselves to look at the terrible, terrible cost. I often hear people comment that the Emperor is a tyrant, and that chaos is freedom. Well, the Emperor may well be a terror, a carbuncle on the face of humanity to some, but no matter his acts of savagery or cruelty, they pale into nothing compared to the evil of the dark gods of chaos. Sometimes it is better the devil you know, and it is Angron to which I usually point when I wish to elucidate the horror of these terrible things. For Angron was dealt the roughest hand in all of the Warhammer setting, bar none. He was a child when he arrived on his world, as all of the Primarchs were, yet where some were born to the purple, adopted by lords or leaders, Angron was brought up in the dust. He was made into a gladiator even as a child. Then they took this prodigy of combat and tried to enhance him. They cut off the top of his skull, then placed an item inside his very mind, called the butcher's nails. They sewed him up and prepared to enjoy. For the butcher's nails were a curse I would not place on anyone, no matter their crimes. No matter how vile an act, there is nothing worthy of this punishment. For the nails dug into the Primarch's very brain, and slowly by slowly, hour by hour, day by day, they drilled into his mind and eviscerated it. It controlled his every emotional reaction, for pain was his only sensory input from there on in. The only time this excruciation dulled, never ended, mind you, just dulled, was when he was in the arena, when Angron was tearing and ripping and annihilating all before him. The nails made it so that any reaction but rage and pain was impossible. Imagine that. A fine meal, a lover's kiss, a child laughing, a friend smiling. All they would elicit from Angron was an all-consuming rage. One he was never free from, as the curse was eating into his very brain. And even when the Emperor found Angron, he knew the Red Angel was broken, utterly. Even that genius, the Emperor, could not work out a way to extract the nails from the Primarch's head without outright killing him there and then. Angron was also deemed a failure, for he had indeed rebelled against his captors, his mutilators. But unlike all of the other Primarchs, he did not win out. Of all the Primarchs, Angron was so mentally deficient that he could not lead his people to victory. He was the only Primarch to be so mentally castrated, you see. And the Emperor took him from his people on their last night of freedom. For on the morrow, the consolidated forces of the planet had them surrounded, outnumbered and outmatched. With the dawn, Angron's slave rebellion was exterminated, and he was not there to even die amongst them, something he never, ever forgave the Emperor for. A cruelty beyond reason is what many have said. But I have given my own thoughts on that matter in my entry for the Primarch project, so go have a shufti if in doubt. And this simmering hatred of the Emperor continued all throughout the crusade. Angron treated his marines, his world-eaters, like chattel, decimating them at whim for being unable to match unrealistic objectives. Angron was one of the few who fell to chaos without any qualms whatsoever. Never a single moment did he look back or second-guess his decision to bend the knee to Horus. Yet, in the last, when he was granted immortality and vast cosmic power by his benefactor god, Khorne, Lord of Skulls, his doom was encompassed. For he always wished for it to be over, for his miserable shadow existence to be put to an end. And now, he was made immortal, unable to ever know peace. But this was on top of the total betrayal of his new master. You know the saying, new boss, same as the old boss. And if Angron has any shred of humanity remaining to him, then surely he hates the Lord of Blood and Skulls as much as he ever did the Emperor. For when he was elevated to Demon Prince level, his pain, it was not negated. Oh no. In his infinite jest, Khorne looked at Angron and knew what made him so potent. It was his rage, his hatred. It was all based on his pain. And thus did Khorne augment his suffering by magnitudes. There was no freedom from oppression offered to Angron. No reward for his rebellion and the billions he had slain in the name of his dark benefactor. No. Angron was cursed with a level of pain that made the angel Sanguinius vomit, and practically unable to fight, simply by experiencing an echo of the intensity of Angron's suffering. So, when anyone states that chaos is freedom, know that they lie. For the dark gods see all beings as their playthings, designed to bring them greater glory alone. And there is no reward in worshipping the dark gods of evil, for evil always consumes itself. Just as Khorne consumes Angron by inflicting on him the greatest pain that has ever existed, for all eternity. Even in the midst of the greatest works of his Lord, the slaughter of souls uncounted, even where the nails once gave small respite in act of that massacre, even then, Angron gains no refuge. I would rather end in the chair of a Dark Eldar than gain blessings directly from the Chaos Gods, for their use of irony is as great as their lust for further power. And so it is that Angron will always feel a level of pain none could even imagine existed, and it will never ever end, until Khorne himself is vanquished and all of his demons destroyed, including Angron. Hence why I call him the boy who never lived, not to detract and diminish him with reductionism, or to portray him as petulant or childish, as so many attempt to do. No. Angron was the child who never lived, his innocence and childhood ripped from him in the sands of the arenas, his adulthood destroyed by what the vile scum had done to his brain. The lack of assistance from the Emperor, then the curse of Khorne. Angron never had a chance to live. Yet he was the perfect weapon of the blood god Khorne, and this cursed being, Angron, was leading a fleet to the Malak system, a master of world-eaters that blotted out the very stars, and his greatest ship, the Conqueror, was at its heart. The Scourged. Ah, but Angron is not the only one who wishes to reap a harvest from the Malak system. Another player joins the fray with a considerable force of their own. Thus, we must discuss the Tzeentchian warband known only as the Scourged. To quote, "In a distant never place amidst the tides of the warp, within a brazier-lit sanctum aboard an Ark of Omen, a huge crystal orb flickered and glowed as it showed Angron vanishing into the Conqueror's embarkation deck. 3 hulking armoured figures stood equidistant around the orb, with their force staves held high. The witchfire that leapt between the heads of the staves illuminated the 3 warrior mystics. It danced across warp-powered armour painted in the panoply of the Tzeentch-worshipping renegade warband, known as the Scourged. Their leader wore a flowing robe over his armor. His helm boasted a pair of curling horns that jutted from its crown, and its faceplate was blank and eyeless. His name was Apopheli Quen, Lord of the Tomeweaver Coven, and he was master of the Ark of Omen known as the Stygian Heart. When Quen spoke, his voice bled from the air around him in a susurrus of interlaced whispers. Even from afar, with the warp to sustain our sorcery, it is difficult to maintain our vigil upon the beast. His very nature is anathema to magics. Yet we have seen enough, have we not? Asked Memnek Kraid in a vox-amplified rumble. The High Magister of Quen's elite guard, the Ninefold Curse, Kraid was a hulking monster clad in mutated Terminator plate. He had neither helm nor head, instead seeing the immutable truth of all about him through 9 yellow eyes that had grown out of his armor. We have. The beast makes all speed for Malak Baal. If we do not hasten, he will despoil our prize. It must not be permitted, hissed the third of their number, Lakshet who hears. He was a hunched figure, his armor gnarled and twisted and festooned with vox apertures and audial pickups. It was both the blessing and the curse of the Scourged, to hear every lie uttered by mortal man. But Lakshet who hears had taken this to a macabre extreme. Neither sound nor even thought escaped his unnatural hearing. He was the Coven's spy master and great seer both, and it was he who had first learned of Malak Baal and its sorcerous prize. It will not be, Quen replied. The duplicity at work upon Malak Baal, the forbidden powers that have been unlocked. These are precious jewels to be taken up and worked by the clever fingers of the Changer of the Ways. They are not for Khorne's idiot dogs to scavenge and destroy. And what of Abaddon's prize? Asked Kraid, as they lowered their staves and the image of the Conqueror faded from their seeing stone. The Coven devastated Alec IV as he commanded, said Quen. We delivered his Gugor through the rift in the ritual chamber, did we not? But he seeks a prize here or so, or he would not have sent the clarion dire amongst Angron's hosts, Kraid persisted. He will learn of it if we steal that which he desires. But that is not what we seek upon Malak Baal, hissed Lakshet who hears. I know not what ritual dainty the War Master desires upon that world, for this even I have not heard. But I do know that the device the corpse worshippers have awoken is not it. So long as our attack does not hinder Abaddon's agents in their recovery mission, I perceive no way in which we might anger him. Indeed, our presence here will only augment Angron's armada. No. So many ships, so many warriors, crooned Kraid. What strength can the corpse worshippers possess at Malak Baal that so many are sent to face it? Tzeentch will aid us in this, said Quen, and the certainty of fanaticism burned in his breast as he spoke. How mighty is the source of this sorcery, and to what ends might we turn it in the Changer's favor? He will see, and he will lend us his aid. And besides, if the foe truly be so many as you fear, the beast and his minions race close upon our heels, said Lakshet who hears, a smirk in his voice. Let them tear one another apart while we claim our prize. Still, should we not send ships ahead to scout the enemy's strength? Asked Kraid. You have said yourself, the radiance of this device blinds the third eye and fours our foresight. It is not our way to fight so blinded. You have eyes enough for us all, Kraid, said Quen. I heed your counsel, but you know I cannot follow it. The delay would be unconscionable. The beast would arrive before us, and he would destroy our prize. I do not believe that a Changer would have handed us this secret only to watch us fail. Spread the word to the captains of the Baal fleet. Ready the Coven. We go to war for the glory of Tzeentch. End quote. And so we see that the forces of the Imperium at the Malak system are in for a rough ride indeed. The Tzeentchian bands of the Thousand Sons are, as we have recently discussed, nothing to joke about. Their martial skill is that of Astartes of the Great Crusade, their sorcery able to defeat all threats that they deign to engage, for they are most often able to predict every last nuance and event of any encounter, usually at any rate. And the Rubricae, despite being mostly automatons, are at the most lively in combat. Practically invulnerable to normal small arms, the armor must be destroyed for there to be a casualty amongst them, for their bodies were turned to dust many millennia ago. But as we shall see, nothing and nobody, no matter their power, knowledge, ability, or support, are infallible. Their fleets are no more skilled or able than any other traitor legion, but they are from ancient times, so they are never to be underestimated. Grey. Such threat was prognosticated of Malak, that a full-brother captain of the Grey Knights arrived, with forces to support his status. The Grey Knights. The Space Marines given gene seed from the Emperor himself. Psychers and warriors without compare, they were the hammer of the Ordo Malleus, the demon-hunting wing of the Inquisition, and Fleet Admiral Abcondis was terrified. For he initially thought that they might try and execute him for agreeing to use the obviously psycho weapon, the Choral Engine. When they stated that they were not here for that, but to help resist the powers about to assail the Malak system, it must have been cold comfort indeed. The Admiral was not to be censured, but on the other hand, the enemy that was about to attack was so mighty that these secretive ultimate weapons of the Inquisition were present to try to resist it. Cold comfort indeed. The assault on Malak. And so we get to the meat of the matter. But please forgive me, gentle listener, as I give an overview, not a blow-by-blow account. For otherwise this entry would last for hours, and ship names listed off can be enthralling when read, but somehow do not always translate well to a listening experience. Hence I shall attempt to encompass the activity as best I can, without bogging you down in the many nuances that the owner of this book can indulge themselves with. The assault. The attack came in a clarion of confusion, but the forces that arrived were not as the defenders had imagined them. The Ark of Omen fleet that arrived had a massive hulk in its midst, the Stygian Heart. But somehow, many were surprised at their advent, for they were a mighty fleet indeed, but even so, they were not superior in number nor ship size than the defending fleet quarters battle groups. The Stygian Heart and its supporting armada flew directly at Malak Baal. The ship crews were disciplined and experienced, but so too were the defending elements of the loyalist Astartes and naval fleets that defended the system. The battle was one-sided from the start, painful and costly, but one-sided. Despite the presence of the massive Ark of Omen, the Stygian Heart, the forces of chaos were too few, and the navy brought them to battle and systematically took them apart. The Ark itself was stripped of the vast majority of its support fleet and turned to limp away into the darkness of the outer reaches of the system. All loyalists wished to rejoice at their victory. The Admiral himself was of a mind to express to the Grey Knights that they had somewhat overbaked the cake in regards to a threat that they had discerned. A good thing he did not do this, as it was then that the system was rent with massive translation signatures. As the fleet of Angron and his world eaters erupted into real space, and all sentient beings in that system heard the call of the enemy as it resounded in their very hearts and souls. Blood for the Blood God! And with that, the true battle began. Angron may have been in perpetual excruciation, Yet he was still a Primarch, and he broke his fleet into 3 prongs to assail the worlds of Malak. 2 seemed to be headed for Malak Ra and Malak Va, respectively, being the other 2 planets of import in the system. But of course, the main fleet headed directly for Malak Baal, the home of the Choral Engine. The Admiral had dispersed his fleet across the system before the first engagement. Being an experienced Admiral, he had placed some ships even at the outskirts of the system, or covering asteroid belts that could have been used as tactical locations from which to strike the inner worlds. Yet when the fleets of the World Eaters came on, there was no celebration, no confidence, as their numbers were even greater than those of the Indomitus fleet, and their aggression was awe-inspiring. The fleets attempted to slow the oncoming Chaos Worshippers, but were outfoxed or outfought, or simply outnumbered at every turn. Glorious bravery was shown on both sides. Boarding actions from the Sisters of Battle and the Marines in the fleet were sent over to the World Eater vessels, or happened on the naval ships, and in confined spaces with little maneuverability. Against World Eaters, the blood ties was eye-watering. Yet the main thrust of the ships heading to Malak Va and Malak Gra were decoys. They ploughed straight through the defending fleets, and then slung-shot around the worlds to head at top speed back to Malak Baal, and the defending Imperial forces were left mostly flat-footed, playing catch-up as they attempted to close and punish the traitor ships as they sailed almost unimpeded to the main event. The Conqueror itself dove into the midst of the defending fleet under Abercondes. In its wake, the most vicious fleet in space. The World Eaters released Ursa's claws and tore apart one after another Imperial ship in close-range slugging matches. Yet all was moot to a certain extent, as the one being they wished to prevent getting to the surface leapt from the hull of the Conqueror and sped like a meteor towards the Fortress of Light and the Choral Engine contained therein. Of course, it was Angron. And with him, the skies were filled with the drop pods and landing crafts of the Legion of Khorne. Berserkers hatched from teardrop drop pods and carved a red tie through all that stood before them, and Angron went straight for the heart of the citadel. In his trail, Angron had no less than 8 bloodthirsters, terrifying embodiments of Khorne's own rage. These gargantuan demons akin to Balrogs fought at his sides. Angron and his entourage tore through the fortifications of the fortress and headed straight for the Choral Engine. Its power burnt and blistered their skin, and when Angron had breached the final defences, there he found the Grey Knights, all prepared for his advent. They chanted his name, they invoked words of power, they threw all of their considerable spiritual power at him, just to slow him down. As they did so, scores of Grey Knights chanting in unison, the bloodthirsters attacked them. Battle raged across the walkways and gantries of the Choral Engine. Light crashed from it as Inquisitor Imagna attempted to burn the unclean from existence. She removed all of the tech inhibitors on the Choral Engines as tired and beaten tech priests wailed at her to stop. The Choral Engine overwhelmed many of the Neverborn on the planet, forcing them into the warp, literally burning them from existence. Yet its force was not enough to banish the bloodthirsters, nor Angron. Like a man fighting against a hurricane's winds, Angron slammed his weapons into the metal beneath his feet and pulled himself towards the device, one step at a time. And then he struck it down. Attacking it with all of his fury, Angron destroyed the Choral Engine. The Imperium had completely and totally lost. But worse was to occur from here. The Choral Engine was linked to the very center of the world. When it was destroyed, the planet simply fell apart, cracked along its axis, and its center left open to space, and there the core of the planet cooled and became a sigil of Khorne. Yet worse still was in store for the defending Imperial forces. For the waves of psychic energy that exuded from the Choral Engine in its last seconds of activity were tainted by the power of corn. And thus was unleashed the murder curse. For all who were touched by its light, both in the Malak system and then out in the greater Imperium that had used it as a beacon, meaning the vast majority of fleet quarters across the sectors, were then assailed by its warp effect. Not all fell to its force. The Adeptus Custodes, the Sisters of Silence, and the Grey Knights were all immune to its corruption. But even Astartes and Sisters of Battle were not proof to its powers, and certainly not the ordinary men and women of the Navy, the Guard, the Mechanicum. Most of them were made into killing machines by its unholy power. Men and women went mad, their eyeballs exploding, their ears bleeding. Or worse, they simply took up their weapons, both ranged and close quarters, and set about themselves, gunning down allies and brothers and sisters they had fought alongside for decades. The murder curse swept through the fleet, corrupting many even to the worship of the dark gods of chaos. So bad was the infection that, in months to come, the entire fleet was designated excommunicate traitores. Even those who had not fallen, for the bad apples had, in the eyes of the Inquisition, infected the entire barrel. And just like that, an entire Indomitus fleet was beaten, broken, corrupted, and declared outlaws to be exterminated with extreme prejudice, all due to the actions of the boy who never lived, the Red Angel, the purported runt of the litter, all because of Angron. But that is not where the story truly concludes. In the darkness of space at the fringes of the system, the Ark of Omen, the Stygian heart, still hid from the carnage, and the Archifane Vashtor would not be gainsaid. As a creator of the Arks, he easily took control of it from the Scourged. He then sailed the Stygian heart towards the broken planet of Malak, using ships around him as a buffer, protecting the Stygian heart from the wreckage of the fleets and the dead planet. He ploughed through until he found what he was looking for, the segment of Malak where the true artifact had been held. Without defenses, on a dead segment of a smashed world, Vashtor was unchallenged. He took the item, a lump of black stone, for within the stone was his artifact, and he sent that through the portal of the Stygian heart back to the despoiler. Their plots nearing realization, Vashtor was more than happy with the result of the engagement. For now, he and Abaddon were one huge step closer to the completion of their designs. To be continued. I have been Baldermort, your faithful servant. Now subscribe and like and all that good stuff if you enjoy the video. And join me every Friday as I take dives into the Warhammer universe. Or check out our other channels on natural history and mythology, links in the video description. Patreon, merch, notification button, you know the boogaloo. Until next time, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.